this southeast area. Before I ask other councillors to introduce themselves, I will hand over to the committee clerk to read out the housekeeping arrangements.
Thank you, Chair. So before we start, there are just a few housekeeping arrangements to mention. Please can I request that mobile telephones and other such equipment are switched to silent mode so as not to disturb the conduct of the meeting. There is no fire test planned for today. If there is an emergency evacuation, please take instruction from the council staff present. The assembly point is located in the car park just down the stairs. The toilet facilities are situated through the double doors here and to the left. The meeting today is open to the public and will be streamed live and for subsequent broadcast via the Council's website. You should be aware that the Council is a data controller under the Data Protection Act. Data collected during the webcast will be retained in accordance with the Council's published policy. By entering the meeting room, you are consenting to be filmed and to the possible use of those images and sound recording for webcasting. One final thing to mention. We have hearing loops available. If you would like us to use one, please let us know.
Thank you. Can I please ask the members and officers around the table to introduce themselves? Please.
I'm Fiona Martinez and I'm a Principal Committee Secretary at Sheffield City Council.
Nick Hamilton, Head of Communities at Sheffield City Council.
Hello everyone, I'm Councillor Kevin Oxley and I represent Musborough Ward.
To your right.
Councillor Jackie Satter from Woodhouse and I'm Deputy Chair of the LAC Committee.
Councillor Karen McGowan for Burley Ward.
Councillor Anne Woolhouse for Bayton.
I am Jane Foles and I'm the South East Local Area Committee Manager.
Councillor Denise Fox, Local Councillor for Burley Ward.
Thank you. I did introduce myself as a chair, but I'm also a councillor for Musborough Ward. Before we proceed with the agenda, I would like to explain how the meeting will work. We will deal with the formal business of apologies, declarations and minutes of the last meeting, etc. We will then move to the important item of the community plan. We will receive a presentation from the LAC manager detailing the community plan for the South East area. The plan has been formulated on outcomes from the recent consultation we have undertaken with the South East community. There will be a discussion and debate and members of the committee will be asked to agree the plan subject to any amendments. Once the plan is agreed, we would then like to move to some more participant engagement activity, which we would like you all to be involved with. We would like to have some breakout groups to consider how we implement the plan. These will last 40 minutes. We will then gather back together and receive a summary and feedback from the groups. We will then have public questions and answers for 30 minutes. This will then be followed by an item on the Transition to Committees programme. We have the Assistant Director of Governance here to talk to us about that. Finally, we have a report for noting on the decision taken by the Community Services Manager. Thank you. Item number 2 is apologies for absence, and I have received apologies from Councillor Brian Lodge, Councillor Bob McCann, Councillor Mick Rooney, Councillor Chris Rosling-Josephs, Councillor Gail Smith and Councillor Paul Wood. Item 3, exclusions of the public and press. There are no items that require the exclusion of the public and press. Item 4, declarations of interest. Are there any members that wish to declare an interest in any of the items of business on the agenda? If so, please ask them to refer to the... Oh, sorry. Are there any members? And would you please refer to the item that you have got a declaration of interest for? Thank you. Okay. Item 5, minutes of the previous meeting. Are these a true... Could someone move that this is a true record? Yeah, someone second it?
Seconded, Chair.
Thank you. All agreed? Right, thank you. Item 6, approval of the community plan. I will now hand over to the area manager to give a presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Welcome everybody, and thank you so much for the contributions that have been made to our local community plan, the South East Community Plan. The plan's based on the consultation that's been taking place since September last year, and then subsequent work that followed from that, from the workshop sessions from the meeting in January. So what I'd like to do, if that's okay, is take you through the plan so that you can understand and you can see what's in there. Okay, next page please. Okay, so section 1 details what is the local area committee. So as you can see, the first page here just states exactly what the local area committee is about and explains that it's for people to be able to get involved and make a difference in their area, to be able to contribute and say what they think is great and good about their area and what they think needs to be addressed and how we look at how services are delivered. It's a chance for the local community to be able to influence decisions and to share their opinions and contribute to any positive changes. Just to mention, we will mention this later on, but each local area committee has £100,000 that it has a budget that's able then to be spent to help develop and deliver the priorities that have been outlined that we'll show you later on in the plan. Okay, next page please. So then the next couple of pages is it just goes on to show you who the local area committee is made up of. As Councillor Downing mentioned earlier, your local area committee is made up of your 12 ward councillors, and the next 2 pages just go on to show you who they are. Okay. Who else is involved? This page just goes on to show who the staff members are involved that support the local area committee. So there's Nick Hamilton, who's on the end, who's the head of service, myself, and Scott and Ed. Thank you. Section 2 talks about the South East. So this gives a brief overview of how the South East is made up and a brief description of the neighbourhoods that make each of the 4 wards. And then the next couple of pages go on to explain what we know about the South East. So it gives you information around the local facilities, population within the area, the housing population, the dwelling types. It talks about the parks and open spaces. That was something that was mentioned very heavily throughout the consultation and focused very highly. And then it just goes on lastly to talk about the industry that represents the South East of Sheffield. Okay. The next page gives you some more in-depth information around the South East and about some of the demographics. So I've mentioned this previously, but for those of you that might not be aware, there's 69,558 people that live within the South East, and then of that number, there's 17% that are between the ages of 0 to 15, 62% just over that are of working age, and 20.8% that are over 65. We've then got information around ethnicity, and then we've got further information that gives breakdown of the area. So we've got 16,724 people that are classed as living in deprivation, and we've got 28.8% of people who have no qualifications. We've got 21.3% who have a limiting long-term illness, and then the breakout between the males and females within the areas, as you can see there, between 48 and 51%. The main industry sectors for the South East are manufacturing, retail and health, and the average household income is just over 38,000, nearly 39,000. The tenure type for the South East, shows you that 68.8% are homeowners, and then the rest are from rented accommodation, just over 18% from the council, 4.5% from housing associations, and 6.6% are from private rented. So that just gives you the information and the feel for the South East area. Okay. So the next section goes on to talk about the South East LAC Community Plan. And the table below just highlights what available funding is attached to the South East. So for the South East LAC, I mentioned earlier, there's £100,000 that is to be used for developing and delivering the priorities that's been identified and that's come out of the consultation. Then within the South East as well, there's also ward pots that's identified for each ward. The reason that it says to be determined there is this is the plan for 22-23, and we're not yet aware of what that information is, what the amounts are. But for last year, just to show you that the Bayton ward was just over 6,300, Burley was 7,900, just over, Mosborough was 7,100, and Woodhouse was 9,140. Each ward, sorry, just go back. It's okay. I'll just talk through it. So each ward also has some SIL, that's Community Infrastructure Levy, and again they need to be determined for this coming financial year. But last year, Bayton's was just over 58,000, Burley's was over 61,000, Mosborough's was 57,000, just over, and Woodhouse's was 88,000, just over. And those allocations are based on the indices of deprivation. We are also given around circa 57,000, and that's to be spent on fly tipping and graffiti issues. So that's to undertake specific projects to address fly tipping and graffiti that are within the priorities that are to be met that we've discussed within the South East.
Just a minute.
Is it okay if I go through it and then we can come back? Is that okay?
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Right. So from the consultation that we'd undertaken, there was lots and lots and lots of comments that came back to us, but the three key themes that came out were transport and highways, environmental issues, and then community safety and crime. For those of you that attended the meeting in January, we talked about these three themes, and then we also looked at what priorities would sit under those three themes. What I'll do next is I'll go through the priorities that have arisen and that we discussed in January and that have come out of the consultation. But as you came into the meeting, you will have been asked which group you wanted to be involved in. And that's an opportunity for you when you go into those specific groups to help develop the delivery plans. So we know what the priorities are, but then what we need to fine tune is, because what you might say is, well, this is only one page, we can get onto it of what the plan is. Sitting behind the actual plan will be the individual delivery plans, which will be much more in depth and more detailed. Okay, next page, please. Right. So for transport and highways, for any of you that were in that group, the key thing that came out from the consultation was around parking, and that covered a whole host of issues. That was around inappropriate parking, parking outside of schools, idling vehicles, parking on double yellow lines, parking in inappropriate places, etc. So as you can see from these pages, what we've highlighted is what the issue is, what the action is, and then we've tried to highlight who the lead responsibility will lay with, and then we've put in timescales that we think are achievable timescales to at least get some movement on those priorities. Okay? The next, go back. Don't want to miss this one. So a real key thing as well that came out was around speeding vehicles, and that was quite evident throughout all of the areas within the South East, as was parking. So what people were saying to us were that, people were speeding in built-up areas. There was speeding in areas, even if they'd got, highlighted numbers. I'm trying to think of what I'm saying there. So if they've got restricted speed signs. Speed limits, thank you very much. My mind had gone blank then. I couldn't think of the word. So when we talked about that, and from the consultation and information that came back from the groups, some of the things that we were already working on was we had the opportunity for each of the ward to look at the vehicle activation signs. So what we were able to look at is to identify 6 locations within each ward, and each ward will be given one vehicle activation sign, one VAS, and that's able to move round the ward. So it will spend probably about 7 or 8 weeks in each location, and then it'll move on to the next location. But what it allows us to do is to identify and gather data from the specific issues that are concerned in that specific location. It was also evident that we probably needed to get more in depth and in detail around what was happening speeding wise. So our recommendation was that we'd look to undertake a speeding review across the South East, and that's commenced in the Mosborough ward. There were some suggestions that perhaps we ought to be out and about more and doing more to tackle speeding. So there was a suggestion that we perhaps look to purchase a speed gun and work with South Yorkshire Police to allow them to be able to undertake further patrols and use of that gun and further action. Next page, please. People also told us that they'd got concerns about public transport, and that although there were some good transport links, that in some parts of the South East area it was difficult to access other parts. So there was some discussions and thoughts around community bus, and then there was suggestions that we perhaps would need to identify links with external partners to perhaps talk to and develop this priority more. There was concerns raised, and a priority came out about congestion and health and well-being, and that sort of like spread across all 3 themes, and that was to look and identify and remove barriers in order to improve active travel. And then there was talks about the transport network. There was feedback around improving accessibility of estates, and one of the priorities and examples that was given was that in some areas there are bus gates that are causing some issues for residents, that although they were meant to actually perhaps make things easier, in some instances it was making things much more difficult to access certain parts of the estates. And then running closely behind that is the pollution and congestion. It was really key that came out again across all 4 wards around the pollution and congestion that was caused around school times, school dropping off and picking up points, around idling vehicles. Not only was it causing pollution and perhaps a danger for the school children and families, but also other residents. So if people needed emergency services at times, the roads were very, very busy and blocked. So it came out as a real important priority. Okay. For environment, the top thing that came out from within the South East around environment was around litter. So not specifically fly tipping, it was around litter, and the amount of litter that was left in and around the South East. So some of the suggestions that came from the feedback from the events that we had in January from the groups there was whether or not we could provide additional support for voluntary litter picking groups, or whether there's anything further we could do to establish further groups, and that really perhaps we needed to look to some of the root causes, and whether we needed to undertake some education campaigns with perhaps the community groups and schools or sports groups to help try and tackle some of the issues with litter. Some of the comments that came back from the meetings in January is that really, as a community group, we needed to think outside of the box. Money's tight, finances, etc., and resources aren't extensive. So we needed to really be creative with some of the things around how we would deliver the priorities. So there was a talk about a sponsor a street initiative. Next on the list was a condition of street lights and footpaths. There was a concern that obviously around the condition of footpaths and the streets and the highways, but actually how people could get to report those. There was a lot of comments that came back that said not only was there an issue with it, but people found it very difficult to get that information through and reported. So that was down as a priority as to how we could highlight that and get that improved. A big A that came out of that was around promoting environmental awareness. With what's going off in the world and the council's current environmental position is how we tackle that within the South East and how we get that sort of like delivered throughout the priority. So some of the things that came out of that was that perhaps we did some work with schools to educate young residents and perhaps promote junior environmental champions. And then there was some suggestions. So across and throughout the South East, we do have some environmental groups, but whether if we were going to do something for the South East and for the LAC, that we looked at perhaps joining that up and develop a South East environmental group with environmental champions throughout the area, that then we formed some links back to within the environmental group within the council and the council's environmental sustainability group. Following on from that, there was issues around contaminated bins across the area. So some of the suggestions that came from that was whether there would be the potential to increase the amount of bins and perhaps educate residents about the correct use of bins. So, for example, the recycling bins, that people are actually aware of what they need to put in those bins and they use them accordingly. And then following on from that, and I suppose linking into that, is that there was some concerns that actually a lot of people did want to use the bins, but they found that there wasn't enough bins in perhaps some of the open spaces. So one of the suggestions for the priorities that came out is whether we could explore options for more communal bins in parks and open spaces. So then when we come to crime and community safety, the key priorities that came out of the crime and community safety group was that off-road biking was a massive issue and it was causing problems in public and open spaces and parks. And again, that was throughout the South East area. And then another biggie that came from that was people's perceived fear of crime. Quite often we would get, or the police or our community safety teams would get complaints of groups of young residents meeting in public spaces. And that led us on to sort of thinking around, well, actually, these young people that are meeting, our young residents, aren't necessarily causing an issue. It's just that people throughout the pandemic have got used to perhaps being in one space. They're seeing groups of people around or congregating that perhaps aren't doing anything, but that's causing a perceived fear. So there was lots of discussions around how we could actually engage with young residents throughout the South East regarding youth provision, what they might actually like to see, how we could use engagement forums differently, use engagement forums that perhaps our young people are more in tune with and engage with. There were some suggestions around TikToks and the use of sports club, for example. The other issue that linked with the perceived fear of crime was the social isolation that people were saying, because people during the pandemic had perhaps got so used to not going anywhere, and some of the groups and the support groups that they had perhaps used in the past no longer existed. So people they felt some support to feel confident going out. So there was some thoughts about how we can perhaps promote this and get this developed. Okay, and the next, on to the next page. Okay, thanks. One of the issues as well that came out that became a priority was a lack of confidence in the police. What people were suggesting was that perhaps to increase confidence in the police and increase that two-way contact was to for the police to engage in more community events. Obviously, they wouldn't have been able to have done that during the pandemic, but we're coming out of the pandemic. Community events are now coming back to the forefront. So there was a suggestion that obviously that's something that the people felt would be more beneficial. People also raised as a priority that that people weren't reporting crime because it was quite difficult to do. So if you were on the phone and you were using the 101 number, it could take forever to get through. People perhaps felt that by the time they'd got through, that the issue might have gone for that time. So just people had stopped reporting. So there was some suggestions that we perhaps highlighted the online portal and the Crime Stoppers number, so that if issues were happening in areas, people felt confident that the information was getting through to the police. The police were saying they would then know about it, and then we could work in partnership with the Crime and Community Safety team to help to tackle that. And lastly, the decline in community groups due to the pandemic, which touches to some of the issues that we'd raised earlier. So people were suggesting that some work needs to be done with residents and forums and groups to create a network and support system for existing groups, and also look at developing new ones. And some of the suggestions there was to increase the number of mother and toddler groups across the South East area is one of the examples, because a lot of the groups had really suffered throughout the pandemic. So those were the key themes that came out. Those were the key priorities. Now you might say, well, some of those, that they're very broad brush statements, and they're meant to be, because this is the start of our community plan. This isn't a task and finish. This community plan will continue to evolve and develop, and as we meet things, some things will fall off, some things will increase and grow. What will happen after we've been through, obviously, this plan is that you will go into the breakout rooms, because what we need to do now is develop the delivery plans for some of those priorities. Some of them are quite straightforward, some of them are not, and some of them will have quite a number of strands to them for delivery. So we really need to hear from yourselves how we get to those delivery plans. We need to have quite open and honest conversations, because we don't have endless pots of money. Some of the things perhaps won't be achievable. What we've tried to do is get the relevant officers to come and sit in those groups from the services throughout the council and externally to be able to work with us. Because what we need to be able to do is, obviously, this is a plan that we all need to own. It's the start of the plan. So I just want to go on to the next page. So the next steps within the plan, I'll just detail what the South East LAC will do. Obviously, what we will do is we will hold 4 public meetings a year, and we'll come back to those meetings. So when we do the delivery plans, they will have some performance indicators in there that we'll need to meet. Some of them won't be able to have performance indicators, but we will have set targets of where we'd like to be and have certain milestones in there. And then we'll come back to the meeting and we'll report back where we are with that. Okay. Thank you.
Is that okay? Is that it? What I'm not going to do at this point is open this up for debate. I've got a gentleman at the back that wants, but what I was going to do, just a moment, sir, and I'll bring you in. What I wanted to do is, if you've got questions on the plan that's just been outlined, there are 3 breakout groups, and they are, I forgot what they are now, transport and highways, environment, and community safety and crime. Now, these breakout groups will be set up. There'll be 2 in here, 1 here somewhere, I think 1 over the back there, and the other one will be through the doors there and into the seated area out there. And if you could raise some of the questions, or if you want to raise some of the questions that's been outlined in the plan, please do. The gentleman at the back, you raised your hand earlier. Do you want to speak, sir?
Thank you. Pat Knox. I wasn't involved in the earlier work on the LAC for personal reasons, I'm afraid, but I well, first an observation. I think I saw figures that indicated that about 25% of the population of this LAC are living in deprivation. That's horrific. I didn't realise that there was such a spread of deprivation throughout an area that, by and large, I'd consider to be well-to-do, comparatively speaking. So 17,000 people, and no doubt that number will increase over the next few months as world events unfold. But my question really was, I don't know how this process has worked over the last few months since it started, but I'd be interested in knowing how our £100,000 budget for South East Ward, or South East LAC I should say, compares to the other LACs. And in particular, I'm interested in knowing whether so-called well-to-do LAC areas, where you might get additional engagement from people, have how much they've been allocated in comparison. That's my first question. And my second question, because I believe in getting my money's worth, is about the speeding side. There was supposed to be a review started by April 22, but I think on one of the slides it mentioned the fact that the review in the Mosborough ward started in January. I wonder whether any facts or figures have come out of that, given that we're now in mid-March, near as damn it.
Thank you. I'll ask Nick to answer the first question, please. And then I think, Jane, you've got figures for the speeding review. Yeah? Okay. Okay, Nick.
Thank you, Chair. Each of the 7 LACs has been given an identical £100,000 budget, and the spend of that will actually be linked to priorities in each of the community plans. So in terms of those budgets, the more affluent areas haven't actually got any more. It's basically, it's an equal playing field in terms of the budget.
So the speeding review we started within the Mosborough ward first of all, and the consultation closed last Thursday. So we've given people 6 weeks to, I think it was 5-6 weeks, to an opportunity to respond to the questionnaires. We had just over 282 responses, and around, I think it was just under 60 people that wanted to be part of a residents panel. So what we're doing at the minute is I don't have the, we're compiling the responses, obviously to be able to come back and feed that back, but we don't have that yet.
Can I ask further follow-up question? Given that we've such a high number of people with deprivation, do we have any idea how many people represent people have actually voted to this place?
No, we know that. We know how many people have applied consultation, so we have numbers, we have a profile, we wouldn't have education information. We know that people from, but that level.
Thank you for your question. What we're going now is I'm going to plan first. The committee want to the question. No. Do we agree to take this plan and then to ways to implement it? Yeah. Okay. Okay. That's it. Okay. Thank you much for that. We now to move out sections. All of you are yeah.
So as you came in, you will have a number and check what you wanted to do. You have done on highways and community crime in this room. I can't say the groups is so traffic and highways we've got safety and crime is at the with me. What we'll need to do is just pick your ears up and we'll move. If it goes in the environment, your door, you're outside, Nick. And we have and we'll reply. We'll be coming back to the room and all collecting together. Okay.
Okay, got that. I'd like to move the breakout groups, please, and say we've got which we can discuss, talk about groups, and we'll come back in your feedback. Thank you. I will be moving round into the groups just to see how things is going as we progress. Okay, thank you. In your breakout groups. We're now going to move on to public questions, and I've got a few here that I'm going to go through, and then we'll see where we get with that. Okay. The first question I've got on here from Richard Pearson from Woodhouse. How does the South East LAC see its role in ensuring the full potential of the Shirebrook Valley with the recently furbished visitors centre for improving the mental and physical health of people and enhancing the natural environment to be realised? With regard to environmental, education, training and development opportunities for the area's younger residents. The written answer I've got from officers is the South East LAC would ensure that where possible it provides support and assistance where it can to help the Valley reach its objectives. The LAC's role is to ensure that services are joined and support and help where they can. Some of the issues raised in this question have been raised as priorities within the environmental theme and will help tackle environmental education, training and development opportunities across the whole South East area. It is important that when developing the delivery plans for the priorities that these issues are included. From Burley, I've got a Stephen Bradshaw from Burley, got a question. Can further speed reduction measures be used in 20-mile-an-hour zones? The council's website suggests that if a street has a 20-mile-per-hour speed limit, then no further action can be taken due to lack of funding. There is a 20-mile-an-hour speed limit in place along Carter Hall Road, Carter Hall School, and the park which is not reducing the speed and noise of the traffic in Charnock. And I've got an answer from Matt Reynolds from Highways, and it's Matt Reynolds from Highways is present and able to answer this, but our understanding is that further measures could be taken if necessary. This is, however, dependent on financial resources and measures that would be needed. For example, speed chicane are expensive, approximately £11,000. There may be other options we could look at, i.e. the purchase of speed gun working and working with South Yorkshire Police to take enforcement action where possible. Is that sufficient an answer, Matt? Where's Matt? I've seen him somewhere. Is that okay, Matt? Is that okay? Yeah, okay.
Just myself and Denise and Brian have been working on this area because it has been raised by residents. I've put our speed indicator device on Bowman Drive to try and slow traffic down before it gets to us. We have had the white lines and everything painted outside the school, and we've been working with the head teacher, and we're putting some bollards to make sure that it's a bit safer for the children when they come out, and to try and stop parking on pavement. So just so that we're trying to add to that as well.
Could I just say something, Tony? Sue Seaman, she lives up on Pendlebury, I think it is, on the Southerly estate, and it's those paths, a lot of them lead down to Rolling Acres, to the park, and people have put in, the garden rubbish, just tipping it over the fences. So that's why she wanted to bring the question today, to see what could be done about it.
If I can just come in there, we didn't actually talk specifically about garden waste. It was more about dog fouling and general litter bins rather than anything else, I'm afraid. But we can obviously take it away and have a look at that issue as well.
Thank you. A question from Craig Hattersley, not at the meeting. Can fines be issued to persistent parking offenders rather than enforcement officers just observing and advising drivers park legally? Is there someone from Parking Services might be able to answer that question, please? There was a guy from Parking Services, I don't know if he's gone. Can we get your... no, you're not here. We'll get a written answer to that one and send it off to Mr. Hattersley. Okay, thank you. We had a question from Janet Harley from Burley. What are the plans to repair, reuse and preserve Burley Bar Spa Bathhouse? I popped in at the group at that point, and I think it was decided that there would be another meeting set up with the executive member. Is that right? Is there any of the Burley councillors want to add anything else?
There's already a meeting organised with the executive member, and we'll come along to join that.
Okay. So, if you've all heard that, okay, thank you. There's a gentleman on the front row here who wants to ask a question.
Well, it's not a question, it's a statement.
Right.
May I do so?
Yeah, do you want to come to the microphone over here?
Whoops. Right, sorry. I hope you can put up with me on this point. But I've come here representing the residents of Rotherham Road and Retford Road in Handsworth to appeal via this committee to the Planning Committee and the Council in general as a whole to reconsider and reverse their decision to allow a Lidl store to be built on the corner of Rotherham Road and Retford Road. On the Council's comments site, one comment was in favour of the Lidl, 25 against. We already have at least 15 such food stores within a square mile of Rotherham Road, and one only 100 metres away from this proposed site. Rotherham Council objected to it because they had a plan to build an Aldi on their new Waverley site. Their plan makes much more common sense. If we do need another Aldi, Lidl type store in the area at all, because their site is dedicated to a new shopping area, and it wouldn't involve any road alterations such as this Lidl site is going to need. We made requests to the Planning Committee to meet with them on site before any decision was made, totally ignored. We had no response from planners either to come and discuss our ideas as residents, what the site could be used for. It's the old Ackroyd and Abbott site, and we do recognise that it does need redeveloping. So we feel, as residents, totally let down, not listened to and ignored. So tonight, I'm hoping that this committee is the means by which the council finally engages with, empowers and enables us to become active participants, reflects residential priorities and concerns in line with the needs of the local community in general. Thank you.
Thank you. What I can say, obviously we will refer this to the planning committee, to the planning service, but what I can say as a member of the planning committee, albeit I'm only a substitute on the planning committee now, I used to chair the planning committee some years ago, what I can say is that competition is not a material planning issue. So you won't be able to get it refused on grounds of because there's enough shops in that area. You would have to find other ways of like traffic problems, crossing the road, causing But certainly we can take this forward to the planning to the planning service and see if they can come up with something for you. Is that okay? Okay, thank you very much. Has anyone else got any questions that have not been answered? Come at the back there, yeah.
I think what I'd like to ask is just a process question, and that is, there's a lot of people up front and involved in working on this, LAC, I should say. What's the ratio between the £100,000 and the cost of all the officers and councillors' time in implementing and delivering the £100,000 budget? Do we have a figure for that?
I can probably get you that. Has anyone got that? Can I? No, we haven't got that to hand, sir. But if you'd like to leave your contact details with us, we will make sure you get an answer on that one. Okay? If you like to do that before you go, is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. My reason for asking should be on.
That's absolutely fine, sir. Yeah. Oh, just a moment.
If I can just add, none of the staffing costs or anything come out of that £100,000 budget. That's entirely separate.
Yeah, it's the balance between that £100,000 which I know is separate and used for the delivery and how much it's costing the council to actually support, develop and help implement it.
Okay. And I think it's also worth just knowing that it's not just about the money in terms of the budget, it's about acting as a conduit, the LAC actually addressing some of the issues, joining up departments, coming up with the solutions and working with partner organisations as well. So the budget's not massive, but you know, the idea is that the extent of what the LAC is able to do is far reaching beyond the £100,000 budget that we've actually got allocated to us, but we can certainly get some figures to you. Okay.
Thank you for that. Is that it? Is there any more? Yes, come in, sir.
It's just for the benefit of people listening at home. I'll do my roving mic bit.
For me, I think we've all come up with some great ideas, or some suggestions on what we want to improve. But there's a couple of things that have stood out for me. So we've had a question already about representation and deprivation. And in the previous LAC, the virtual one, we talked about representation there as well, that we've not got young people. So we're already talking about we're missing young people. We might be potentially missing some people from deprived areas. There's potentially a lot of other groups that we aren't representing in this room today. So I guess my first question would be, what's been done since the previous LAC to increase representation? So if we've known it's been a problem, what's changed, really? That's my first question. I can ask my second one as well. Yeah, so great ideas that have come out again, and I guess it's what's going to be the mechanism to measure that. And when we're thinking about measuring the change that's come out of these ideas, we don't just want to compare from the beginning to the end. I'm thinking about real improvement measurement, so measuring through time, maybe statistical process control charts, something like that. Surely that's got to be what we're looking at if we're looking at this wide-scale change. So I've just got a question about what are we going to measure, how are we going to know what we've said is going to change, and is it going to be effective?
I know we have spoke about. Is it Jane? You want to answer that, Jane? Yeah. Go on then.
So thank you, very good question. So since we had the virtual meeting in January, we have been engaging with youth services and other community forums to try and establish, we haven't got massively far, but we are trying to put together a network where we can engage. So we've had some previous suggestions and good suggestions again tonight, how we actually can go out and engage with the underrepresented areas. We're working quite closely with some of the sports groups and some of the other community groups as well. There's really no easy answer for that. It's just that we keep going and we keep trying to, I suppose, find something that does work for those outside of the usual options and means that we use. So we have acknowledged that, but again, it's an ongoing process. Absolutely.
Denise?
Can I just add something? We've just selected, well, the schools have a new youth council, so that might be something that we could, invite the youth council in this area. We've got 4 members of various ages and so we could invite them to our next meeting to either participate or be, observe.
And again, a very good question on the second part of the mechanisms that we're going to use to measure. I think, as I mentioned earlier, some of the priorities that were there, we could have perhaps some key performance indicators which will be easy to measure against. Some of the things, so around youth provision and engaging with the underprivileged areas or the hard to reach groups, it's very difficult to try and measure that. So any suggestions, we're open to anything, to be fair, because not one size will catch all.
Yeah, this is one of the ideas of the LAC, that we can engage with people, and not only the people that are here tonight, engage with all areas of the community, that's young and old, and whatever. Okay, so that's something that we are still it's ongoing. Okay, thank you. Is there any more questions? Yes.
Just to follow on from the question the gentleman asked, is it possible to do these meetings as hybrid? I'm in some organisations that do hybrid meetings, and it just helps people, particularly who have issues with public transport, have disability, attend the meetings.
We tried a hybrid meeting. I forget which group we were in. Which was it? We were doing a hybrid. Yeah, our particular Labour group meeting that we held, we tried a hybrid. It was very difficult, but that's not to say it can't be done, because it has been done in other areas. But I'll be open to officers to see what they could say to that.
If I can just add, we've got some new webcasting equipment which you'll see here, and this is why we're sat in a U. we're actually trialling this for the first time, and the intention is to actually move to a hybrid model going forward. But we just need to actually iron out any particular issues. We've got the technology first of all. So up until a couple of weeks ago, we weren't even allowed to have a public meeting. It had to be virtual. So we are aware that people, some want to come out in person, whereas others actually want to stay at home because it's easier. They can't get there because of transport. So it is on the agenda. You've just got to bear with us until we actually get the tech right and just feel that we're comfortable with it. But yeah, absolutely.
This relates to the previous question about the cost of these meetings. You'll notice the council is investing real money in trying to enable both councillor meetings and meetings like this to take place in a way which is accessible in the ways that we've become used to doing during the pandemic. But it, as well as being a technical challenge, it's a financial one, and doing something in a setting like this, where every time we have a different meeting, it's in a different hall, in a different space, in different shapes, it raises real challenges for the hybrid thing. So we're doing what we can to try and make that work, as Nick said, but we're going to have to watch this space and see whether we manage to land it.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay. What I want to do now is, you'll probably be aware that the council for some years now has been run by what they call a strong leader in cabinet. And we had a referendum last year, and it was decided, that referendum, that we move to a committee system, and this is part of that. But from May, the next election, and from May, we're going to move to a full committee system. So I've got Alex Polak here, the guy that's just spoken to you now. He's the Assistant Director of Governance, and he's going to give you an overview, a very short overview of what the transition to committees will mean. Alex.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm aware that this topic, governance of local authorities, might not be the sort of thing that you want to keep you from your homes and your dinners for too long. So I am going to be as brief as I can. Not everyone is as excited by this kind of thing as me, but I'll try and make it as interesting as possible. As was mentioned, so I'm Alex Pollock. I'm Assistant Director for Governance here. I'm only temporarily working with the council. My role here is to get this piece of change done. I'm working with Democratic Services colleagues and people across the whole council and councillors to make this change happen. But I'm delighted to be here. So there's two things I'm covering, which is really the two areas that are supposed to change. Who is going to be making decisions, because that's changing a little bit, and how they'll be made. So obviously I'm talking about decisions that are made by the council, and we're talking about which councillors in what settings are making those decisions. I'm trying to leave time for questions now, but my suggestion is, not least because of the time of the evening, that if you're somebody who's really interested in this and you want to have a chat about the detail, come and find me afterwards and we'll have a really good chat about it. But if there's something you want to ask while we're on the webcast and so on, we'll have some time for that as well. The context, most of you will be aware of this. Forgive me, I'm not going to read it all out, mostly because of what I promised to do this quickly. But what I want to draw your attention to is the last bullet point on this list, which is where we're pointing out that this isn't the final picture. So something is changing in May. We are going to need to respond to a referendum that happened that tells us we must change the way we make decisions. But we're aware that there's a bigger picture, which is that, well, why did people vote in the referendum to change to a committee system? Was it because all those people had a view about how they wanted decisions to be made, that it should be a committee and not an individual, and that sort of thing? Or was it to make other points about Sheffield City Council listening to residents and engaging with them as it made decisions? So we're really thinking about making this change, attempting to address that wider picture as well as just the narrow specifics of the governance change that's actually required by the referendum. And we're expecting that we will need to respond to feedback from councillors, officers, and most importantly, partners, stakeholders, the public, about whether it's achieving what we wanted it to over the coming year, and keep adapting it. So at a fundamental level, for those of you who aren't familiar, here's what's changing. We currently have a system where there is a full council with all 84 councillors in it. They delegate a large chunk of their authority to a range of other committees that do things like planning and licensing. You've heard a bit about that already this evening. But one of those bodies that they delegate that power to is a cabinet. That cabinet is made up of a leader that full council appoints and the individuals that that leader appoints around them, which means that it's not a politically proportionate body. It's usually made up of just one party or maybe two. Currently you've got a co-op exec, which is made up of two parties. In the new world, the bit of this that's changing is just that. It's just that we're going from a leader and a cabinet to multiple new committees in that part of the system. So all that power that was previously held by the leader and the cabinet around them is now going to be enacted by a series of committees, each of which have their own specific subject matter area. This detail isn't finalised yet. I know that's teeny tiny on your screen, but again, I promise not to get into the detail, but I wanted you to know that it's there. That we've got a committee meeting tomorrow. You can find the details of it online, the governance committee. They're looking into the details of this. They've done an inquiry over the past 6 months, including a series of public engagement events between about October and December, where we had a whole range of stakeholders and public come and give us their views. And they've helped us look at this part. This is Sheffield's actual version of what I just showed you. That bit at the top, the co-op exec, that's that cabinet. These transitional committees are temporary this year to help us figure out how we wanted to do the new thing. And those committees at the bottom, what we call scrutiny committees, they are the mechanism that's currently used to allow people from other parties to challenge and kind of keep an eye on and try and influence what that cabinet does. In the new world, the expectation, if the committee tomorrow agree this and if full council agrees on the 23rd of March, is that that is all replaced by this. It's a whole collection of policy committees, each of which with a subject area. You can see housing, regeneration and climate, economic development and skills, etc. There's one called strategy and resources that has all the chairs of all the committees on it and takes a view across the piece. This is, I should say, reasonably standard for a committee-led council. There are about 20 councils that have moved back to being a committee-led authority recently. So it's reasonably standard, but it's been tailored for Sheffield. The names of those committees and exactly the way it's been organised has been designed by Sheffield City Councillors with a view to the feedback they've had from residents during the last few months. There are a whole lot of details we've been designing about how it'll work, and as you can see, overall it's a very complicated picture, but as I said, I promise not to go in too much detail into all of that tonight. The important thing to note is that we are tonight in one of these local area committees, okay? Note that they separately report to full council. So the important thing about that is, and this was council's decision only recently, that the LACs will not be subordinate to one of those other policy committees. They report directly into full council because all 84 councillors sit on these LACs, and they wanted to sort of respect the value of these committees as being alongside those policy committees. You are a decision-making committee in your own right. You have power that's derived straight from full council. So those other committees will be working alongside, and another thing that councillors have decided recently is that these committees, these local area committees, will be able to refer issues, if they wish to any of those policy committees. So that's a lot of links. You've got 7 local area committees, and you've potentially got, 9 or 10 policy committees. So by my maths, we're talking about 60 or 70 odd links to consider. But it's about enabling local area committees to raise what they think is important to that strategic attention as necessary. So it's all about trying to help local area committees be as effective as possible for their local communities. The rest of that system, I should say, much like local area committees, is not being meddled with by this change. So just that part that's been where we're replacing the cabinet with a series of committees, that's the primary change. And the local area committees, the power that they have, the way they work, isn't being changed at May by this process. I said I'd also talk about what's changing about how decisions are made. So I've covered who's doing it, a series of committees. Well, I mentioned that there was a sense we needed to respond to why was there a referendum and what was meant by that referendum. And a lot of the work that we did when we spoke to members of the public and stakeholders was to understand that actually this was about involving the public, making sure that the voice of public stakeholders, etc., is central to decisions when they are being made, and that we are not losing sight of the voice of residents when we're going through that process. And some of the feedback has been very stark, and that we've fed directly back to councillors around residents not feeling listened to and not feeling like they see action from comments and feedback and so on. And these local area committees are part of responding to that, but the way that this new system works should also be part of responding to that. And so in local area committees, we're going to carry on as we are, but in those new policy committees, you will have every political party represented on each committee. They will be collectively responsible for decisions, proportionally to the full council. So the way that Sheffield City votes is represented on each of those policy committees, and you've got accountability there across the political spectrum for every decision that's made. I want to give you a bit more information about those last 2 points. I've got 2 more slides. I know that's tiny, but I hope some of you can read it from where you are. One of the things that the committee tomorrow is looking at and is hoping to recommend to full council is that when councillors are looking at all of the pipeline of decisions that are coming forward at that strategic level, that they will be expected to be using the toolkit which gives them a series of options for how they might make sure that the public, stakeholders, partners, residents are plugged into that decision and they've heard those voices as they go along. And what you can see on the screen is a whole list of ideas for how that might work that we as a council are interested in exploring and trying to get working, that would be applied, as relevant, as proportionate to any particular issue coming forward. I hope you'll see that there's some things on here that have occasionally or even regularly happened in Sheffield, but there's also a whole lot of new ideas and a real ambition that this is something that you could start to see happen more frequently involved in the decision-making process. But that's really just a starting point. And the other thing that's come out really clearly from this work is that there's a whole distance to go. Officers and councillors, I think, acknowledge that they've got a lot to do to improve trust with residents and to get to a point where they do feel like their input is going to be heard and fundamental to the decisions and options that are being put forward. And so another part of what the committee are looking at tomorrow and recommending to full council is a commitment to a longer-term bit of work on a strategy, further engagement, make sure they're getting this right, a way that we are going to continue to develop the way that both officers and members make decisions in Sheffield. So a toolkit's all very well, but that's just a starting point. How do we make sure that all the way from the very beginning, when an idea is just a twinkle in an officer's or a councillor's eye, how do they from then say, how will we make sure that the public and residents and stakeholders and partners feed into this idea long before it gets to a committee and they consider how they're going to involve the public at that stage. So it's all about from genesis through to decision, trying to get that public engagement and participation piece right. So it's a starting point in May and a commitment to further work on that. Those are all of my slides. I'm aware I spoke very quickly, but I tried to get it done quickly. I'm happy to take through you, Chair, any questions people may have, or to be collared after we close for the evening.
We only have about, is it 5 minutes left of this meeting? But if anybody's got a burning question they want to ask Alec now in the public meeting, or as Alex has offered to speak to you after, then that's fine. So I don't know if anybody wants to got a burning question they need to ask in public. Yes, sir.
I'm being slightly facetious in asking this question, but it is complicated. And how would you answer the question if someone were to raise it? Are you mad?
Yeah. Ali?
Wibble? So, without being facetious, a move to a committee system is something that was subject to, I think, more or less a citywide debate last year. The public made its view perfectly clear through a piece of direct democracy that happened last May. We are seeking to enact that as faithfully and effectively as possible. So that's what you have in front of you.
Okay, so that decision is here for report. The report is here for noting, and I'm to ask the committee to note that. Item 8, decision taken by the Community Services Manager. Presenting officer expected to be Jane. The report is here for noting. Is that accepted? Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you all very, very much for your attendance tonight. It's really good to see you all, and it's great that these local area committee meetings have now got moving, and look forward to the next one, which I believe, I can't give you a specific date because we haven't got the specific date. However, I can tell you that it will be in June. Okay. And you will be notified of where the venue will be at that time and the exact date later. Okay. Thank you all for your attendance. Thank you very much indeed. And thank you to the committee.